The restaurant sat on the corner of 53rd Street in Manhattan, tucked between a jewelry store and an art gallery. People called it the Grandeur, and the name fit perfectly. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. White tablecloths covered every table without a single wrinkle. The silverware sparkled under soft golden lights, and a black grand piano stood in the center of the room like a sleeping giant dot. This was not a place for ordinary people. The cheapest dish on the menu cost more than what most folks spend on groceries for a week. Businessmen close million-dollar deals over steak and wine here. Celebrities hid in private booths away from cameras. Old money families celebrated anniversaries at the same tables their grandparents once sat at. And somewhere between all this wealth and elegance, a 26-year-old woman named Lucia carried plates back and forth. Trying to stay invisible, Lucia had worked at the Grandeur for almost 2 years now. She was good at her job, quick on her feet, careful with orders, and always polite no matter how rude the customers got. Her manager liked her because she never complained and never caused trouble. The other waiters liked her because she would cover their shifts without asking for anything in return. But nobody really knew her. She kept to herself. During breaks, while others chatted and scrolled through their phones, Lucia sat alone in the back corner of the kitchen, staring at nothing. Sometimes her coworkers tried to include her in conversations, but she always gave short answers and gentle smiles that never quite reached her eyes. There was something heavy about her, something sad. But nobody asked about it, and she never offered to explain. What her coworkers did not know was that Lucia lived in a tiny studio apartment in Queens, the kind of place where the radiator clanged all night in winter and the window unit barely worked in summer. She had a small bed, a folding table, and a photograph of her mother taped to the wall above the sink. Her mother had passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. The kind that starts quietly and then takes everything. Lucia had been by her side through all of it. Every hospital visit, every round of treatment, every sleepless night. She dropped out of school to take care of her. She held her hand when the doctors said there was nothing more they could do. She was there at the end, whispering that everything would be okay, even though nothing was okay, and nothing would ever be okay again. When her mother died, she left behind nothing but love, memories, and $200,000 in medical debt. So Lucia worked double shifts, sometimes triple. Every dollar she earned went toward paying off what they owed. She ate cheap food, wore old clothes, and never bought anything for herself. There was no room in her life for fun or friends, or dreams. Not anymore. But there was something else about Lucia that nobody at the restaurant knew. Something she had buried so deep that even she tried to forget it most days. When she was a child, she could play the piano like it was an extension of her own body. She started learning at 5 years, old on a broken keyboard her mother bought from a thrift store. By 7, she was performing at local talent shows. By 10, she had won state competitions. By 14, she received a full scholarship to study at one of the most famous music schools in the country. People called her a prodigy. Teachers said she had a gift that came along once in a generation. Her fingers moved across the keys like water flowing downhill. Natural, effortless, beautiful. Her mother used to sit in the front row of every concert, crying happy tears and clapping louder than anyone else. She would say the same thing every time Lucia finished playing. "Music is your gift, Mia. Never let anyone take that from you." But life had a way of taking things whether you let it or not. When her mother got sick, Lucia stopped playing. There was no time for practice, no money for lessons, no space in her heart for anything except fear and grief. The piano that once felt like home now felt like a stranger. Every note reminded her of what she was losing. After the funeral, she could not even look at a piano without feeling like her chest was caving in. So she stopped. Completely. For 4 years. She did not touch a single key. The girl who once dreamed of concert halls now dreamed of nothing at all. She just worked, paid her bills, and tried to survive one day at a time. That was Lucia's life. Invisible, quiet, broken in ways nobody could see. And then one evening, everything changed. It started like any other Friday night at the Grandeur. The restaurant was full. Every table booked. The pianist played soft jazz in the background, while guests laughed and clinked their glasses. Lucia moved between tables with practiced ease, refilling water, taking orders, and clearing plates. Around 8 o'clock, a group of 5 men walked in. They were loud before they even sat down. Expensive suits, shiny watches, the kind of confidence that came from having more money than they knew what to do with. The man leading the group was in his early 50s. Tall, gray hair slicked back, a gold ring on every other finger. His name was Carlton Hayes, and everyone in New York who followed business news knew who he was. Real estate developer, investor, the kind of man who bought buildings the way normal people bought coffee. He was also known for something else, though it never made the news. He was cruel, not the kind of cruel that left bruises, the kind that left scars on the inside. He enjoyed making people feel small, especially people he considered beneath him. Waiters, drivers, assistants, anyone who served him. He treated them like they were less than human, and he did it with a smile on his face. His favorite game was humiliation. He would find someone's weakness and press on it until they cracked. And if they dared to fight back, he would make their life miserable. He had gotten people fired for looking at him the wrong way. Tonight, Carlton was in a particularly good mood. He had just closed a deal worth $50 million, and he wanted to celebrate. His associates laughed at his jokes, agreed with everything he said, and pretended not to notice when he was rude to the staff. Lucia was assigned to their table. She walked over with menus and a polite smile. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to the Grandeur. Can I start you off with some drinks?" Carlton did not look at her. He was too busy talking to the man beside him about a yacht he was thinking of buying. He just waved his hand in her direction like he was shooing away a fly. "Bring us your best whiskey. The whole bottle. And make sure the glasses are actually clean this time. Last place I went to, the glasses had fingerprints on them. Disgusting." His friends chuckled. Lucia nodded and walked away without a word. She had dealt with men like him before. Rich, arrogant, rude. The trick was to stay calm, do your job, and forget about them the moment they left. But something about tonight felt different. Something in the air. Lucia did not know it yet. But in less than an hour, her entire life was about to change. And it would all start with a single glass of water and a cruel man's joke. Lucia returned to Carlton's table with the bottle of whiskey and 5 crystal glasses on a silver tray. She moved carefully, the way she always did, making sure nothing wobbled or clinked together. She had done this 1,000 times before. It was muscle memory by now. She set the glasses down one by one in front of each man. Then she opened the bottle and began to pour. Her hands were steady, her posture straight, her face calm and professional. Carlton was still talking. Something about her property he wanted to tear down and rebuild into luxury condos. His friends nodded along like puppets on strings. None of them even glanced at Lucia. To them, she might as well have been a ghost. But then Carlton stopped mid-sentence. His eyes landed on her for the first time, and something shifted in his expression. It was the look of a cat spotting a mouse. "Hey," he said, snapping his fingers right in front of her face. "Hey, waitress." Lucia paused and looked at him. "Yes, sir. Is there something you need?" He leaned back in his chair and looked her up and down slowly. Not in a way that was inappropriate, but in a way that made her feel like she was being measured and found worthless. "Where did they find you?" he asked. You look like you just rolled out of bed." His friend snickered. Lucia kept her expression neutral. She had learned a long time ago that reacting only made things worse. "I apologize if something is not to your liking, sir. How can I help you?" Carlton waved his hand dismissively. "Just pour the drinks faster. We don't have all night." She nodded and continued pouring. Her jaw was tight, but she did not let it show on her face. When she finished, she asked if they were ready to order their food. Carlton made a big show of looking at the menu like it was beneath him. He ordered the most expensive steak on the menu, then added a list of modifications so long that Lucia had to write them down twice to make sure she got everything right. "And make sure the chef doesn't mess it up," Carlton added. "Last time I was here, the steak was overcooked. I had to send it back 3 times. Do you think you can handle passing that message along, or is that too complicated for you?" "I'll make sure the kitchen knows, sir," Lucia said quietly. She walked away from the table, her heart beating a little faster than usual. She told herself it was fine. Just another difficult customer. She had survived worse. The next hour passed slowly. Lucia served other tables, brought out appetizers, refilled drinks. Every time she passed Carlton's table, she could feel his eyes following her. It made her skin crawl, but she kept moving, kept working, kept pretending she did not notice. Around 9 o'clock, the pianist finished his set and announced he was taking a short break. He stood up from the bench, stretched his back, and walked toward the kitchen to get something to eat. The grand piano sat empty now, silent. The spotlight above, it still glowed softly, like it was waiting for someone to sit down and bring it back to life. Lucia tried not to look at it. She hated looking at pianos. Every time she saw one, she thought of her mother. She thought of who she used to be. She thought of everything she had lost. So she kept her eyes on her work and pretended. The piano was not there. A few minutes later, Carlton's table needed more water. Lucia grabbed a pitcher and walked over. The men were laughing loudly about something, their faces red from whiskey and self-importance. She reached across to refill the glass closest to Carlton. And that was when it happened. Just as she started to pour, Carlton shifted in his seat. His elbow swung out and knocked hard against her arm. The pitcher jerked. Water splashed across the tablecloth, soaking the edge of Carlton's sleeve. It was not much. Maybe a few drops on his jacket, a small puddle on the white cloth. Nothing that could not be cleaned up in seconds. But Carlton reacted like she had set him on fire. He shot up from his chair, so fast that it scraped loudly against the floor. The whole restaurant turned to look. "What is wrong with you?" he shouted. His voice echoed off the walls. "Are you blind? Are you stupid?" Lucia's face went pale. "Sir, I'm so sorry. It was an accident. Let me get you a towel." "An accident?" Carlton laughed, but there was no humor in it. "No, this is incompetence. Pure, pathetic incompetence. How hard is it to pour water? A child could do it. A trained monkey could do it." His friends watched with smirks on their faces. They did not say anything to stop him. If anything, they seemed entertained. Other diners looked away uncomfortably. A woman at the next table whispered something to her husband. A young couple near the window exchanged uneasy glances. But nobody spoke up. Nobody told Carlton to stop. Lucia stood frozen, the pitcher still in her hands. Her cheeks burned. Her throat felt tight. She wanted to disappear into the floor. The manager, a thin man in his 40s named Mr. Bernard, hurried over from across the room. He looked nervous, his eyes darting between Carlton and Lucia like he was calculating which one mattered more. "Mr. Hayes, please accept our deepest apologies," he said quickly. "This is completely unacceptable. I assure you, we will take care of everything." Carlton ignored him. His eyes were locked on Lucia, and there was a cruel smile spreading across his face. He was enjoying this. She could see it. He was enjoying every second of her humiliation. And then his gaze drifted to the empty piano. Something lit up in his eyes. A new idea. A new game. You know what? Carlton said loudly, making sure the whole restaurant could hear. I just realized something. You can't pour water. You can't take an order without messing it up. You probably can't do anything right. He pointed at the piano. But maybe you have hidden talents. Why don't you go over there and play something for us? Entertain us. That is what you're here for, right? To serve? Lucia's stomach dropped. She shook her head slightly. Sir, I'm just a waitress. I don't play. Carlton laughed. Oh, come on. Don't be shy. I'm sure you can manage something simple. How about chopsticks? Even a child can play chopsticks. His friends burst out laughing. One of them slapped the table like it was the funniest joke he had ever heard. Carlton kept going, his voice dripping with mockery. Tell you what, you go over there and play us a little song, and I'll give you a big tip. Biggest tip of your life. Enough to buy yourself some new clothes, maybe some lessons on how to do your job properly. More laughter. Lucia felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give him that satisfaction. Sir, please, she said softly. I don't want any trouble. Carlton's smile disappeared. His expression turned cold. I'm not asking, he said. I'm telling. Go play the piano, now. The restaurant was completely silent. Every eye was on Lucia. She could feel the weight of their stares pressing down on her like a heavy blanket. Mr. Bernard stood beside her, useless. He said nothing, did nothing. He was too afraid of losing Carlton's business to defend his own employee. Lucia looked around the room, at the wealthy guests who avoided her eyes, at her co-workers who watched helplessly from the edges, at the man in front of her who saw her as nothing more than entertainment. And then she looked at the piano. It sat there, gleaming under the spotlight, silent, waiting. Something stirred deep inside her chest, a feeling she had not felt in years. It was faint, buried under layers of grief and exhaustion, but it was there. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Music is your gift, Mia. Never let anyone take that from you. Slowly, Lucia set down the pitcher. She untied her apron and placed it on the table, and without a word, she began walking toward the piano. The distance from Carlton's table to the piano was maybe 30 feet. Lucia had walked past it hundreds of times during her shifts, carrying plates and clearing dishes, never giving it more than a quick glance. But now, those 30 feet felt like 30 miles. Every step she took echoed in the silence. The clicking of her worn black shoes against the marble floor sounded impossibly loud. She could feel every pair of eyes in the restaurant following her, watching, waiting. Behind her, Carlton leaned back in his chair with a satisfied grin. He nudged the man beside him and whispered something. They both laughed quietly, like they were watching a circus act about to begin. This is going to be good, Carlton said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Get your phones out, boys. We might want to remember this. One of his friends actually pulled out his phone and started recording. Lucia did not turn around. She kept walking. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her palms were sweating. Her legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. A voice in the back of her mind screamed at her to stop, to turn around, to apologize and go back to work like nothing happened. But another voice, quieter and older, pushed her forward. She thought about her mother. She thought about the first time she ever touched a piano. She was 5 years old, standing on her tiptoes to reach the keys of a dusty old keyboard at a neighbor's garage sale. Her mother had noticed the way her tiny fingers pressed the keys, the way her face lit up at the sounds they made. You like that, Mia? Her mother had asked. Lucia had nodded so hard her head almost fell off. Her mother bought that keyboard for $12. It was missing 3 keys, and the sound was fuzzy and broken. But to Lucia, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. She practiced on it every single day. Morning before school, afternoon after homework, night before bed. Her mother would sit nearby and listen, even when Lucia played the same simple melody over and over again. "You're going to be great someday," her mother always said. "I can feel it." And for a while, it seemed like she was right. Lucia won her first competition at 7, then another at 8, and another at 9. By the time she was a teenager, she had a shelf full of trophies and a future brighter than she ever imagined. But then her mother got sick, and everything stopped. Lucia reached the piano and stood beside it. The black surface gleamed under the spotlight, polished and perfect. She could see her own reflection in it, distorted and strange, like looking at a ghost of herself. She had not sat at a piano in 4 years. 4 years of silence. 4 years of avoiding music, avoiding memories, avoiding the person she used to be. What if she had forgotten how to play? What if her fingers no longer remembered the keys? What if she sat down and nothing came out but noise? The fear wrapped around her chest like a tight rope. She could barely breathe. From across the room, Carlton called out, "What's the matter? Stage fright? Don't worry, we won't judge much." His friends laughed again. Someone at another table shifted uncomfortably in their seat. Lucia closed her eyes. She thought about her mother's hands, rough and worn from years of cleaning houses and working factory jobs. Hands that never got to rest, never got to be soft, because they were too busy providing for a daughter with big dreams. She thought about her mother's smile, the way it could light up a room even on the darkest days, the way it made everything feel possible. She thought about the last words her mother ever said to her. It was in the hospital. The machines were beeping softly. The room smelled like antiseptic and flowers. Her mother's voice was barely a whisper, but Lucia heard every word like it was thunder. "Don't stop playing, Mia. Promise me. Music is your soul. Don't let it die with me." Lucia had promised. She had held her mother's hand and promised through her tears, and then she broke that promise. For 4 years, she broke it every single day. But maybe tonight, she could start keeping it again. Lucia opened her eyes. She pulled out the bench and sat down slowly. The leather was cool beneath her. The keys stretched out in front of her, black and white, familiar and terrifying all at once. She placed her hands on her lap and stared at the piano. The restaurant was completely silent now. Even Carlton had stopped talking. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. A woman near the front whispered to her husband, "Should someone stop this? This feels wrong." Her husband shook his head. "Just wait." At a table in the far corner, an older gentleman sat alone. He had gray hair, kind eyes, and a calm expression. He had been watching the whole scene unfold without saying a word. Now, he leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on Lucia with something that looked like curiosity. Lucia did not notice him. She did not notice anyone. She was somewhere else now, somewhere deep inside herself, in a place she had locked away years ago. She lifted her hands and placed her fingers gently on the keys. The touch sent a shock through her whole body. It was like electricity, like coming home after being lost for years. The ivory was smooth and cool. The black keys rose up between her fingers like old friends. She pressed one key. Just one. A single note rang out through the silent restaurant, pure and clear. The sound hit her like a wave. Memories flooded in. Her mother clapping after her first recital. The smell of the practice room at her music school. The feeling of losing herself completely in a piece. Forgetting the world existed. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she did not wipe them away. Carlton shifted in his seat. His smile had faded a little. He had expected her to fumble, to embarrass herself, to give him a good laugh. But something about the way she sat there, the way she touched that single key, made him uneasy. "Come on," he called out, his voice a little less confident than before. "We're waiting. Play us something. Chopsticks, remember?" Lucia did not respond. She took a deep breath. Then another. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind one more time. "Music is your gift, Mia. Never let anyone take that from you." Lucia closed her eyes, and then she began to play. But it was not Chopsticks. It was not some simple nursery tune or clumsy melody. From the very first chord, the sound that filled the restaurant was something else entirely. It was Chopin. Ballade number 1 in G minor. One of the most difficult, most beautiful, most emotionally powerful pieces ever written for piano. And Lucia played it like she was born for it. Her fingers flew across the keys with speed and precision that seemed impossible. The notes poured out of her like water from a broken dam, fast and fierce and unstoppable. The melody rose and fell, soft one moment and thundering the next, filling every corner of the room. Carlton's jaw dropped. His friends stopped laughing. The woman who had whispered to her husband covered her mouth with her hand. The old gentleman in the corner leaned back in his chair and smiled. And Lucia kept playing. She played with her eyes closed, tears streaming down her cheeks. She played for her mother, for herself, for every dream she had buried and every promise she had broken. She played like her life depended on it. Because in a way, it did. The music filled every inch of the restaurant like a living thing. It curled around the chandeliers, swept across the white tablecloths, and wrapped itself around every person in the room. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Lucia's fingers danced across the keys with a speed and grace that did not seem human. Her hands moved independently, the left building deep, rolling waves of sound while the right painted delicate melodies on top. The notes came so fast, so perfectly, that it was hard to believe they were coming from the same quiet waitress who had been serving bread and water just minutes ago. The piece she played was not simple. It was not background music. It was Chopin at his most complex, his most emotional, his most demanding. Professional pianists spent years mastering this piece. Some never got it right. It required not just technical skill, but soul. You had to feel every note in your bones. You had to bleed into the keys. And Lucia bled. The opening section was dark and mysterious, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The notes rumbled low and ominous, building tension with every passing second. Then the melody shifted, becoming lighter, almost hopeful, like sunlight breaking through the clouds. But just as quickly, it plunged back into darkness, the bass notes crashing like thunder. At a table near the window, a young woman sat frozen with her fork halfway to her mouth. She had been about to take a bite of her salmon when Lucia started playing. Now, she could not move. Tears were forming in her eyes, and she did not even know why. Her date reached across the table and took her hand. He did not say anything. There was nothing to say. Near the bar, one of the waiters had stopped polishing glasses. He stood with the rag still in his hand, staring at Lucia like he was seeing her for the first time. He had worked beside her for almost 2 years. They had shared shifts, split tips, complained about difficult customers together. And he never knew. He never had any idea. In the kitchen doorway, 3 cooks had gathered to watch. One of them, a large man with tattoos covering both arms, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and looked away, embarrassed. But he did not leave. None of them did. The music grew more intense. Lucia's body swayed with the rhythm, her shoulders rising and falling, her head tilting as the melody demanded. She was not just playing the piano anymore. She was speaking through it. Every note was a word, every phrase a sentence, every passage a story. And the story she told was one of lost Dot. It was the story of a little girl who loved music more than anything in the world, who practiced until her fingers ached and her eyes blurred, who dreamed of concert halls and standing ovations, and making her mother proud. Dot. It was the story of a young woman who watched that dream slip away, piece by piece, as the person she loved most slowly faded, who held her mother's hand through the longest nights, who learned that life does not care about your plans or your talents or your hopes. It was the story of someone who had lost everything and somehow kept going anyway, who woke up every morning even when she did not want to, who worked and survived and endured, even though part of her had died in that hospital room 3 years ago. All of that pain, all of that grief, all of that silent suffering poured out through the piano. The notes carried it into the air, and everyone who heard it felt something stir in their own hearts. Carlton sat at his table like a statue. His face had gone pale. The smug grin was long gone, replaced by something that might have been shock or confusion or maybe even shame. His friends were equally silent. One of them had put his phone away. Another stared at the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. For the first time in his life, Carlton had nothing to say. The music reached its climax. Lucia's hands flew across the keyboard in a blur, the notes cascading like a waterfall, faster and faster, louder and louder. The sound was overwhelming, filling the room until it felt like the walls might burst. And then, suddenly, everything changed. The storm passed. The chaos faded. The music became soft, gentle, heartbreaking. A simple melody emerged from the noise, pure and beautiful, like a flower blooming in the middle of a battlefield. This was the part of the piece that Lucia had always loved most, the part that reminded her why music mattered. After all the darkness, after all the struggle, there was still beauty. There was still hope. There was still something worth holding on to. She played those final passages with her eyes closed, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. She did not try to hide them. She did not care who saw. She was not playing for Carlton anymore. She was not playing for the wealthy guests or her coworkers or her manager. She was playing for her mother. She could almost feel her presence in the room, almost hear her voice whispering encouragement, almost see her sitting in the front row the way she always used to, with tears in her eyes and pride in her smile. "I'm sorry I stopped, Mama," Lucia whispered under her breath, so quiet that no one could hear. "I'm sorry I broke my promise, but I'm playing now. I'm playing for you." The final notes hung in the air like a prayer, soft, fragile, eternal, and then silence. Complete. Absolute silence. Lucia sat at the piano with her hands in her lap, her head bowed, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. She had given everything she had. There was nothing left. For 3 long seconds, nobody moved. Then someone started clapping. It was the old gentleman in the corner, the one with the gray hair and kind eyes. He rose to his feet, his hands coming together in slow, deliberate applause. His face was calm, but his eyes were bright with something that looked like wonder. Others joined him. The young couple by the window, the woman who had covered her mouth, the waiters by the bar, the cooks in the doorway. Within moments, the entire restaurant was on its feet. The applause was deafening. It echoed off the walls, filling the room with a sound almost as powerful as the music that had come before. People were crying openly now. Strangers turned to each other and shook their heads in disbelief. Someone let out a cheer. Lucia looked up, startled by the noise. She had been so lost in the music that she had almost forgotten where she was. The sight of everyone standing, clapping, some of them wiping tears from their cheeks, hit her like a wave. She did not know what to do. She had never expected this. She had never expected anything. She just sat there, overwhelmed, as the applause went on and on. At his table, Carlton remained seated. He was the only one in the room who had not stood up. His friends had risen with everyone else, caught up in the moment, but Carlton stayed in his chair, staring at Lucia with an expression that was impossible to read. His face was red. His jaw was tight. He looked like a man who had just been slapped in front of everyone he knew, because, in a way, he had tried to humiliate a waitress. He had tried to make her look small and stupid and worthless. He had wanted to laugh at her expense, to feel powerful at her cost. Instead, she had shown him and everyone else in the room who she really was, and in doing so, she had shown them exactly who he was too. The applause finally began to fade. People returned to their seats, still buzzing with energy, still stealing glances at the piano and the woman who sat there. Lucia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She took a shaky breath, and then she heard footsteps approaching. The footsteps belonged to the old gentleman from the corner table. He walked slowly, with the kind of quiet confidence that came from a lifetime of knowing exactly who he was. His gray suit was simple but elegant, and his eyes held a warmth that made Lucia feel strangely safe. He stopped a few feet from the piano and looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. "That was Chopin's Ballade No. 1, he said softly. "I have heard it performed by some of the greatest pianists in the world, in concert halls across Europe, in private recitals for kings and presidents." He paused, and his smile grew wider. "I have never heard it played like that." Lucia blinked, unsure how to respond. Her hands were still trembling. Her cheeks were still wet with tears. She felt like she had just run a marathon, emptied out and exhausted in the best possible way. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. The old man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small white card. He held it out to her. "My name is Theodore Ashford," he said. "I am the artistic director of the New York Philharmonic." Lucia's heart stopped. The New York Philharmonic, one of the most famous orchestras in the world. The kind of place she had dreamed about as a child, lying in bed and imagining herself on stage, playing for thousands of people. She had never imagined meeting someone like this. Not here. Not now. Not while wearing a wrinkled uniform and smelling like kitchen grease. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Theodore chuckled softly. "I come here sometimes when I need to think. The food is good. The atmosphere is quiet. Tonight I came for the steak. But I think I found something much more valuable." He pressed the card into her hand. "I would like you to call me," he said. "We have a guest soloist program for exceptional musicians. I believe you would be a perfect fit." Lucia stared at the card. Her name was not on it. Her past was not on it. Just a phone number and an address and a future she had stopped believing in years ago. "I haven't played in 4 years," she said. I'm not who I used to be." Theodore tilted his head and looked at her with those kind, knowing eyes. "My dear," he said gently, "what I just heard tells me exactly who you are. The question is whether you are ready to remember." He gave her a small nod, then turned and walked back to his table. Lucia sat frozen, the card clutched in her hand like a lifeline around her. The restaurant was slowly returning to normal. Conversations resumed, though they were quieter than before. Waiters moved between tables, though they kept glancing at the piano. The energy in the room had shifted, like the air after a thunderstorm. Mr. Bernard, the manager, approached her hesitantly. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his hands like he did not know what to do with them. "Lucia," he said quietly. I had no idea." She looked up at him but did not speak. I should have said something, he continued. When that man was treating you that way, I should have stepped in. I was wrong not to. Lucia studied his face. She could see the guilt there, the embarrassment. Part of her wanted to be angry with him. He had stood by and watched while Carlton humiliated her. He had chosen money over dignity, business over basic human decency. But another part of her understood. Fear made people do strange things. Survival made people make choices they were not proud of. She knew that better than anyone. It's okay, she said finally. I understand. Mr. Bernard shook his head. No, it's not okay. But I want to make it right. He paused and took a deep breath. Take the rest of the night off. With pay and, if there's anything I can do, anything at all, please let me know. Lucia nodded slowly. It was not much, but it was something. A small step towards something better. She stood up from the piano bench on shaky legs. Her whole body felt light, like she might float away at any moment. She picked up her apron from the table where she had left it and held it in her hands. Unsure what to do next, that was when she noticed Carlton. He was still sitting at his table, surrounded by his friends, but somehow completely alone. His face was a mask, but she could see the cracks beneath it. The embarrassment, the anger, the desperate need to save face in front of the people he was trying to impress. His friends were gathering their things, ready to leave. One of them muttered something about calling it a night. Another checked his watch and avoided eye contact with everyone. Carlton stood up abruptly. He threw some cash on the table, far more than the bill required, and started walking toward the exit. But Lucia stepped into his path. She did not block him. She did not raise her voice. She just stood there, calm and steady, and waited until he met her eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Carlton's jaw tightened. He was not used to people standing up to him. He was not used to being looked at with anything other than fear or admiration. But Lucia was not afraid of him anymore. And she certainly did not admire him. My mother taught me something, she said quietly. She taught me that kindness costs nothing. That treating people with respect is not a weakness. It's a strength. Carlton said nothing. His face was red, his hands clenched at his sides. I don't know what happened in your life to make you the way you are, Lucia continued. But I hope someday you learn what she taught me. Before it's too late. She stepped aside and let him pass. Carlton hesitated for just a second. Something flickered in his eyes. Something that might have been shame or regret or just wounded pride. Then he walked past her without a word and disappeared through the front door. His friends followed quickly, heads down, avoiding the stares of the other guests. And just like that, he was gone. Lucia let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. Her hands were still trembling, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. One of her co-workers, a young woman who worked the bar, walked over and put a hand on her shoulder. That was incredible, she said softly. You're incredible. Lucia smiled, really smiled. For the first time in longer than she could remember. 6 months later. Lucia stood backstage at Lincoln Center, wearing a black gown that had been fitted just for her. Her hair was pinned up, her makeup done by professionals, her hands wrapped around a bouquet of white roses. Through the curtain, she could hear the murmur of the crowd. 2,000 people, filling every seat in the concert hall. They had come to hear her play, her debut with the New York Philharmonic. She had called Theodore. The day after that night at the restaurant. Her hands had shaken so badly she almost dropped the phone. But she made the call. She took the chance. And everything had changed. The months that followed were a blur of practice, rehearsals, and rediscovery. It was not easy. There were days when she doubted herself, days when the grief came rushing back and she could barely touch the keys. But she kept going. She owed that much to her mother. She owed it to herself. The debt collectors had been patient. Theodore had helped her find a financial advisor who set up a payment plan. The burden was still there, but it no longer crushed her. She could breathe again. And now, here she was. The stage manager gave her a nod. 2 minutes. Lucia closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She thought about her mother, about the $12 keyboard, about the promises made and broken and made again. "I'm here, Mama," she whispered. "I made it." She opened her eyes, straightened her shoulders, and walked onto the stage. The applause washed over her like a wave, but she barely heard it. Her eyes found the front row, where her co-workers from the restaurant sat together, cheering louder than anyone else. Beside them was an empty seat. On it rested a single white rose. Lucia sat down at the grand piano, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. And somewhere, she knew her mother was listening.